Okay, perfect. So let's get started.
Yeah, no, I want the ones specifically mentioning.
Okay, I
If
bringing
possible.
Eder, I will take care of it as soon as the class is over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
perfect. Okay, everyone, good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Morning, good to see everyone. Yes, I heard people complaining about spring, but I think that the reason why we have this is just to appreciate spring a little bit more. So it's cold, so
Good.
I think winter is trying to have its last hurrah. And in general, when negative things have to go, sometimes it looks like they're leaving and then they come back and then it looks like they're not, but they eventually do leave. And so I think that we know spring is coming. It's just a matter of patience, and for Ezra Hashem, we're going to have better days and sunnier days, and hopefully open and revealed good in all those days in all our lives. So before I begin, I just want to say that I'm going to be starting a class for preparation for Pesach. We're going to go through the Haggadah and also do some thematic issues on Passover. And right now I'm leaning to do it on Tuesday morning at 11. But I want to know if this is a good time, or our evenings better. This is what, before I schedule it, I want to just make sure that everyone is on board, or the majority. We're not going to make everyone happy. So if you have a preference, just in the notes, in the comments, you could just write your preference for what day or what time works for you, and I'll try to work around that. Okay. So, and then we'll have a 3 parts. Hey, Rona.
Hi.
You.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
But Rabbi got me the same.
Yeah. So I'm. Someone
He
asked
got me
for
Alexa's mirror.
and I am going to. Take care of that as well. This is all like kind of technical stuff, but both the links and the recordings, it's one of the projects that I've been trying to streamline. I have to get some help. Okay, so Tuesday 11 is good. It's great. So I think that's if you can give me your feedback, and I'll just try to see when works for most of the people, and then we'll take it from there. So this past week, we already blessed the month of Nisan. We at Shul, they blessed the month of Nisan, Shabbat Mevarchim Nisan, and Rosh Chodesh is this week. It's, I think, Friday. So we're getting into the month of Nisan, into the holiday into the atmosphere of Pesach. And as I mentioned last week, that we're supposed to get ready psychologically and emotionally and also physically 30 days before a holiday, especially a holiday like Pesach that is so important in terms of our calendar and also in terms of the Jewish ethos and the consciousness. So that's one thing. And in general, the days that we're living in through now, even though the world is in chaos, from a Jewish perspective, the month of Adar is a month of blessing and a month of revealed turnabouts and in a positive way. And the month of Nisan obviously has in it the etymology of nes, which is miracle. And so there's so much to look forward to. First and foremost, leaving winter. And of course, winter is a euphemism for that which is dry and difficult. Yesterday, I saw a most magnificent sight. I saw this huge flock of birds flying in formation, arriving, from the south. And I was just mesmerized by it because they fly so gracefully and with such precision. And it's beautiful to witness. And what I find amazing is how they know to come back. And indeed, the next morning I heard birds out of my window, and I was wondering, did they go to Plattsburgh or New York for a couple of days now that it got really cold? And it could be they do. I don't know how they operate, but there's something so magical about the way these birds come back and kind of know where to go. I for years and years, I had a robin that would come and perch itself on a tree in my backyard, a little red robin, and it would come back like clockwork and just sit at my tree. I always I always, was just amazed by that. So I think that that's something to also celebrate the fact that we do have these seasons, and even just walking outside and hearing, well, not today because we touched winter again just for a couple of days, I guess, but just hearing the water rushing because of the snow that's melting, there's something so renewing about it. And
That's the
sorry.
It's the Canada geese that are flying overhead, and
Okay.
you heard the same birds, the same type of bird, multiple days because there are thousands of them that are going like now.
Oh, okay.
And it's
Okay.
twice a year you see them go in the other direction in the fall.
Right.
I always look for it for the seasonal change.
Yes.
It's like amazing.
It's really beautiful, and I think that one of the benefits of having a kind of a cold winter and a hard winter is that we appreciate nice weather. So many people take the nice weather for granted, and when we have a beautiful day, we just kind of breathe in and we exhilarate in it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. We're able to perceive the different elements and how it influences us. So looking forward to that together. Now, this week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Tezriah. The Torah portion of Tezriah is one of the Torah portions that are found in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus. And as mentioned many times, the book of Leviticus contains a huge amount of laws that pertain to the area that we refer to as Tuma and Tahara, very poorly translated as purity and impurity, because the notion of Tuma and Tahara does not have to do with purity per se, though there is a certain connection to it, but it's not a precise translation. And one of the things that I like to share, and that you've heard me say this for those of you who have attended my classes for a while, that I heard a great notion from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs years ago, where he says that sometimes to translate Jewish ideas into English is like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And the reason for that is because we're talking about different paradigms. We're talking about different systems. So the meaning of one in one language reflects the culture, and the meaning of one in the other language reflects that culture. And the culture is very, very different, and it's distinct. And it's easy to kind of try to loop it all together, but it's not a fair assessment. So what we have in the book of Vayikra is a tremendous amount of discussion about again, for the lack of clarity, for the lack of better words, I'll use purity and impurity, though if we could use just Tuma and Tahara, Tuma being impure, Tahara being pure, because it's much more accurate, and there is no word in the language that properly translates the meaning of Tuma and Tahara. This is because Tuma and Tahara is not only about cleanliness and uncleanliness, purity and impurity. It's a state of consciousness where there's a higher state of consciousness and a lower state of consciousness. And what I mean consciousness, not consciousness like a conscientiousness or consciousness in the regular meaning of the word, but in the spiritual meaning of the word. In other words, is that there's a spiritual aspect to that state. So I'll give you an example. The Torah portion this week opens up, and the name of the Torah portion is called Tezriah because it opens up and it says, Isha ki Tezriah, v'yalda zachar, a woman who conceives and has a baby boy, and it gives the laws for a woman who has a baby boy. And we're going to get into the verse very, very shortly. And so we open up with the laws of childbirth. And then from the laws of childbirth, we segue into the laws of Tzarat. Now, Tzarat, again, is translated as leprosy. But again, the commentators say that Tzarat is not leprosy in the classical sense, but Tzarat is a physical manifestation of a spiritual malaise. And it's very interesting that childbirth, which is a very happy event, is juxtaposed with tsaras, which is a negative event. There's very little to be found that's redeeming in having tsaras, because if you look at it as a physical transmission of a disease, it's not a positive thing. And if you look at it from a spiritual transmission of a lack of spiritual consciousness, it's also a negative thing. So what's the connection between childbirth and tsaras? And so it right away, it highlights to us that tsaras, by the very fact that it is juxtaposed with childbirth, it denotes that tsaras is not what we think tsaras is in the classical sense of the word. And when we look into the commentators, we see that all commentators look at tsaras from a different perspective. So first, let me get into the actual parsha. Where are we? Okay, now again, I have to find my parsha on my computer because it's moving it around. Here, come here, please. Come here and don't jump. Hold on a second. Okay, Torah reading, perfect. So here we have the Torah reading of this week's Torah portion. Sorry for scrolling like that. So it starts off, this is the Torah portion of Tazria. Tazria, parenthetically, during the times that we have a regular year, not a leap year, Tazria and the following portion of Mitzorah, which deals with the same issue, are read together, but this year it's separated, which gives us an opportunity to get into the idea of tsaras a little deeper. So it starts off, this week's Torah portion starts off and says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemar," God spoke to Moses saying, "Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, lemar, saying, Isha ki tazria, if a woman conceives, v'yelda zachar, and she has a male son, v'tama shivas yamim, she will be tameh," okay, translated as impure, for 7 days, kimei nidas daivsa timasa, like as in the days of her menstrual flow, she shall be unclean. So a woman gives birth to a baby boy, she has 7 days of impurity. And Rashi notes here that, interestingly enough, we have the laws of what's clean and unclean in the human being. And last week, what did we discuss? The laws of clean and unclean in animals, right? So why do animals precede the human being? So Rashi is kind of maybe troubled by it, why animals precede the human being. So Rashi says, he brings down a teaching from Rabbi Simlai, who says that just as in creation, man was created after all the domestic animals, wild beasts and birds, so too when the laws of cleanliness, the man of man is stated after the law of the animals, etc., etc. And this is a quote from the Medrash. Now, why is that? Why do human beings follow the animals? And so there's two answers to that, very classical. One is because to know that if we become arrogant in thinking that we're better than the animals, God reminds us that the animals preceded us here on earth. And the other reason is that we can see that everything that was created in this world, including the animals, were created for us to have governance over, and to use those resources judiciously. So there's a double meaning, and here it includes a woman who has a stillborn, and so on and so forth. And then it tells us that if it's a boy, parenthetically, he has to be circumcised on the 8th day. And then there's a period of called 33 days where she stays in the blood of her purity. She doesn't touch anything holy, and she doesn't go into the sanctuary for about 33 days. And then we're told that if she gives birth to a female, then she's unclean for 2 weeks, like her menstruation period for 2 weeks, and for 66 days, so double. And the laws that are brought for after a woman gives birth, and then we're told And then we have, right after that, we go straight into the laws of Tzaras. So first of all, there is this question that we have addressed in previous Torah portions, study of this Torah portion rather, which is why is it that when a male is born, the mother is only impure, or whatever terminology we're comfortable using, for 7 days and 33 days, different stages of purity or impurity. And when it comes to a girl, it is double. So 14 days and 66 days, as opposed to 7 days and 33 days. So that's one question. And then the second question is why it immediately follows, why Tzaras immediately follows the childbirth. So we're told right away, Adam kiya ba'ar b'sarai, if a man has a seif or sapachas here, they don't translate it. You see how they say seif is in Hebrew, they say seif. Sapachas, they write sapachas. Baheres, they write baheret, on the skin of his flesh, and it forms a tzaras on the skin of his flesh. He's brought to the Kohen and to one of the to the children of the Kohanim to ascertain what is the lesion on the skin of his flesh. And here we go into great laws about the skin on his flesh and the lesions and how it's ascertained if it's tzaras. And if it is tzaras, then the person has to he has to remove himself. He has to be quarantined, a word that we're quite familiar with. He has to be quarantined for 7 days, and if it goes away, then it comes back, and if not, there's a great deal of law. So first and foremost is the question: why is it that a woman who gives birth to a son has to wait only half the time when she gives birth to a daughter, and then why is this juxtaposition between childbirth, a very happy event, and tzaras? And the answer is this: that both childbirth and tzaras denote a spiritual diminishment in the body. Now, why is it that childbirth denotes a spiritual diminishment in the body? Anyone? Why does childbirth denote a spiritual diminishment in the body? The woman just gave birth. Her body was used to bring life into this world.
From the time of Adam and Eve, when God said that women will be made to suffer during childbirth.
Yeah, but why is it that after she gives birth, that woman enters into a state of, the woman's body enters into a state of diminished spiritual consciousness? Or
I don't know.
Maybe when she was pregnant, she had 2 neshamas. She had an extra neshama that she was carrying in her.
I don't want to know. I don't know the Jewish explanation, but physically, the woman after giving birth is rarely there 100%. So I don't think she even has energy to be spiritual or do anything until, sometime.
And part of her has left her. So the body and the mind, they're integrated. And if part of the body has left her, there is an adjustment period for sure.
okay, so excellent feedback. And indeed, everyone who brought something up here is contributing to the point that the rabbis talk about, which is basically this: that when a woman is carrying a baby inside of her, it's interesting because biology and physiology line up very much with the spiritual ideas here. And that when a woman is carrying a baby within her, and we know this, that a woman, women when they're pregnant, they have a flow, a glow rather on their face, and that represents the added life that they're carrying. But when that baby leaves their body, and there's a vacuum. There's a vacuum where there was that life. And when the process of that birth is finished, meaning when the blood of the birth is still leaving and still healing, that means that whole vacuum is still very much in play. And so what we have is a spiritual vacuum. Even though a happy event and a child was born, from the woman's body, there is a spiritual vacuum. And physiologically speaking, Vera mentioned the woman's very tired, doesn't have the energy, but also we know that psychologically and emotionally, women go through baby blues. They feel very weak. They sometimes cry a lot, and they don't understand why, because they feel they should be happy they had a baby, but instead they're actually feeling very depressed and sad. And the answer is very simple, that there was something that happened to their body. Their body was a vehicle for life, and that life now is outside of them and no longer part of their body. And so their body is going through a stage of diminished spiritual conscientiousness. And it's a very difficult time for a woman, which is interesting because physiologically it's a difficult time, not just because she's tired from having given birth, but for the pregnancy being over, in as much as she is so excited with a bundle of joy. So it's an interesting dichotomy. And spiritually speaking, there's the notion from the mystics that when there is a vacuum, any kind of vacuum, there is an opportune time, or I'm trying to, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but it is maybe a critical time where, or a vulnerable time, where the energies that are rooted in lack of vitality are more have an in, so that when there is a lack of consciousness, a lack of spiritual vitality, when there's that lack of spiritual vitality because of the change, the person actually becomes is in a fragile state, spiritually speaking, and also emotionally speaking. The person is in a fragile state because that person now is like there's the vacuum creates an opening for negative energies. That's what the mystics tell us. Now the question is, why does a woman?
Why the difference?
Why the difference? Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's clear to me. I mean, it's really clear. But why the difference between a girl and a boy?
So why the difference between a girl and a boy? So very interestingly, we know that a girl has the potential to be a mother, to be the person who can carry a baby, really at birth, in the sense that a baby girl is born with all her, with her ovaries and with all the eggs that she will ever have in her life. She's born with it. So that the loss of a baby girl after birth, spiritually speaking, creates a bigger vacuum than the loss of a baby boy, and therefore the double time of waiting, because of her capacity, not necessarily the fulfilled capacity, but her potentiality to be a person who carries a baby in her own body. So the loss of the baby girl is actually more spiritually impactful than the loss of a baby boy. Now, obviously, not emotionally, it's the same. Psychologically, it's the same. Physiologically, there's no difference. But spiritually speaking, it's double. It's a very interesting idea that there's a kind of consciousness to this. So by putting this entire framework of women's childbirth as a time of spiritual loss for the woman, and double loss by virtue of having a girl, there is it's kind of directs us to what a tzaras is. What was tzaras essentially? Tzaras was a skin lesion that spread throughout the body. If it wasn't, sometimes it stopped in its tracks, and sometimes it would continue to spread. And sometimes it would spread even to the walls of the house and to other materials. So there's a very big discussion. Was tzaras a physical disease that no longer exists? Was it a combination of a physical and spiritual disease? There's a real big discussion about this in the commentators. And interestingly enough, Maimonides, the Rambam, who is by far the most I guess is branded as the person who looks at everything through a very logical and empirical type of lens. Right, Maimonides is very much influenced by the you know, he was a doctor, a scientist. He saw things through. He liked to see things through a very practical lens rather than a mystical lens. We know that a person who bears a similar acronym, and sometimes people confuse them in Hebrew because it's very similar. Nachmanides in Hebrew is pronounced as Ramban with a nun at the end instead of Rambam with a mem at the end, was very mystical and clashed with Maimonides in certain ideas. But Maimonides overall has a very pragmatic and almost scientific approach. And Maimonides, in his Moreh Nevuchim, in his Guide to the Perplexed, goes into detail that Tzaras is a spiritual problem, much more than a physical problem, and it's a psychosymptomatic disease. In other words, God is giving you the ability to correct things about yourself. Your body is out of whack; it's not holistic because of a spiritual imbalance, and it manifests in a rash on your skin, which is catchy, and so on and so forth. And the sages say, and this is very interesting, the sages say that Tzaras came about from speaking Lashon Hara, gossiping, talking about others. And this is something that the Talmud says and the commentators say, and they point to the fact that Miriam, in the desert, she once criticized Moses. Her and Aaron were criticizing Moses about the way he treated his wife. You know, they were standing up for their sister-in-law, and they spoke ill about Moses. And right away, Miriam was afflicted with Tzaras, and then Moses prayed on her behalf, and she had to leave the camp, and Moses prayed on her behalf, and she was eventually cured. But the fact that it happened right after she spoke in the Torah, she speaks about Moses and she criticizes him behind his back, not to his face, which is, by the way, very different. There's this connection that the rabbis make between Tzaras, which is translated, again, to quote Jonathan Sacks, you know, a square peg in a round hole, not accurately as leprosy, but it is something that is similar to leprosy, obviously. But it really,
psoriasis.
Well, the rabbis saw this really as a spiritual ailment that came as a result of talking ill. I remember I once had someone in my class and said, well, when a person creates negative energy, like, and it causes stress, and so the Tzaras manifested itself. Or like there's a Yiddish expression that says "Afen ganef brennt the hitzel," which means like the hat burns on the person who is the hat burns on the person who's not yeah, exactly. So, but the fact is that Maimonides says that no, Tzaras is very much a spiritual disease, and it is a disease that which a kindness, the kind of God is like an early warning system where God is letting you know you're out of kilter, you're speaking gossip. So really, a lot of times when the rabbis talk about the Tzaras, they talk about gossip. But before we get into the idea of how Tzaras and gossip and what's the message of the gossip that we find regarding Tzaras, we have to really go into the notion of what's happening when a person gets Tzaras. It is a level of diminished vitality. The person is not whole. They're not complete. And it's interesting that even in English, the word holy is connected to the notion of wholesomeness. So that when a person is holy, okay, they are whole, meaning that they are complete. And being in a state of incompletion or lacking physical vitality, like the woman who just gave birth, and like the person who has Tzaras, we're talking about a different type of lack of vitality. Obviously, the highest level of, or the most impactful form of lack of vitality that we find is the lack of vitality, unfortunately, God forbid, when a person loses their life completely. And we know this in the Jewish custom of, after attendance of a funeral, to wash hands. And all Jewish funeral homes will have a wash basin outside the building or outside a cemetery to wash hands, because we feel like we've lost our vitality. Similarly, when we wake up in the morning after having slept, and again, a loss of vitality, because when we're sleeping, the Talmud says sleep is 1/60th of death. What does it mean that 1/60th of death? Person doesn't die, but they're not fully aware. We know that, for example, there's a certain muscle paralysis that happens when we sleep, that our ears somehow turn out what we hear, and there's we perspire differently, we operate on a different wavelength. We're not in a full vitality, and we know that if we don't get that sleep, that time that we need to go to that place where our body operates on a reduced level of vitality, we will carry it through the day. We'll be very tired and we'll walk around with that lack of vitality. So it's very interesting that when we wake up in the morning, because we slept, we have to wash our hands. But what happened when we slept? We didn't get dirty. We could be so clean, having taken a shower right before we went to bed, sleeping in clean sheets. We wake up very clean. So what is the lack of vitality? How is it manifest? It's manifest by the fact that we were checked out, like we were not 100% there. And so we see that there is there's a certain commonality between the lack of vitality that we see in the woman who has just given birth, by the fact that the baby that was sitting in her womb is no longer sitting there, and there's a vacuum, as it were, and the person who has tzaras, who doesn't have their full health. And as we know, often in medicine, that what needs to come out comes out in our skin. So when you see this often with small babies, they'll have a virus, and then the virus will come out in the skin with a rash. And once the rash really comes out, most of the virus is gone, and it's a sign that it's almost over. So the skin is a manifestation of a lack of vitality that is happening within the body. And then you have, of course, the ultimate lack of vitality is when the body is lifeless. So all of them share this kind of, even going to sleep and waking up, share this kind of lack of vitality. And so therefore our rabbis say that we cannot look at tzaras only from the perspective of the person who is having a skin disease, but rather we have to see it as a greater lack of vitality, something bigger. And they choose, interestingly enough, they choose the idea of gossip, lashon hara, and speaking ill of another person. Now, human beings gossip. You'll have the the scientists and the scientists who study human behavior, the psychologists, and even you'll have people who are the evolutionary scientists that will say, oh, there's a reason why we gossip. It's to share information, and it's a way of connection. It's a way of relieving stress. It's a way of feeling better because someone else has a bigger problem than us, and so on and so forth. So we see that it's very human to gossip. And I saw an interesting study that although men gossip, women gossip much more than men do. And not surprising, because women connect through speech. We resolve our problems often by talking. We need to talk it out. We feel better after having spoken. We feel more relaxed after having spoken, and sometimes that connection is made with gossip. But the Torah is telling us that's not the good way to be. And gossip actually, even if though today we don't get tzaras, gossip actually creates the same spiritual malaise as tzaras does. So the message that the rabbis have regarding, and Maimonides of all people, the rationalist himself, that says that tzaras should be seen not as a physical disease, but as a spiritual disease, and literally from the words dis-ease, so lack of ease, that there is something in your spiritual vitality that is lacking. So that when we gossip, we're bringing ourselves into an arena of a lack of spiritual vitality. Even though it may feel good at the time to gossip, we don't usually feel good after we gossip. And that's because we know that there was something not so spiritual and not so uplifting in the gossip. So how do we cure gossip and our need for gossip? So obviously there's two pathways. So there's one pathway which is called sur meira, avoid the bad. And the Chafetz Chaim is one of the great sages in the 20th century. He's called Chafetz Chaim. That wasn't his name. He was called Chafetz Chaim for his book, and his book was based on the verse, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamin liras tov. Who is the person that wants life, vitality, not just long life, but vitality. Chafetz chaim, he seeks. To chafetz means to seek. Who seeks life? Who's a seeker of life? Ohev yamin liras tov. He loves his day to see good. Nitzar l'shon chamera. Keep your tongue from speaking evil. Usfasecha midaber mirma, and your lips from being deceitful. And then it says sur meira, turn away from bad, va'aseh tov, and do good. Vakesh shalhem, seek peace, v'rotfeu, and run after it. So that's why he was called the Chafetz Chaim, because his book, his actually was Rabbi Yisrael of Radin. His book was based on this verse of who wants to seek life. What is it to seek life? The one who will be careful with how they speak, because you want to seek peace and you want to pursue it. And obviously, speaking ill does not bring peace, but unfortunately does the opposite. As we know, that's like the first ticket into it. So there's two pathways, which is one is like zip your lips and don't say anything, which works, but it doesn't deal with the underlying issue. And the other one, it's like having a gate. You know, if you have a gate where, let's say you have a gate where a person can't enter, it deals with the issue, you can enter, but not with the reason that why the person wants to enter. And sometimes if they see the gate is a little open, they'll go in or they'll go through a window. So you want to deal with the underlying reason or the underlying way that a person can strengthen themselves. So the fact that we're told, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim, who desires life, meaning full, vibrant spiritual conscientiousness, not like the person who has saras, who has a limited conscientiousness, not like the person who slept and is sleeping, and all these things who show a limited consciousness, rather full consciousness. Nitzar l'shon chamera usvasecha midaber mirma. Keep your lips from speaking ill and keep your lips from speaking ill, and also your tongue from being deceitful. And so what we have is this notion that there is this connection between vitality and full health and saras, this disease, as Maimonides says, it's connection. That is the ultimate connection. One brings the other. Now today, of course, we don't have this connection. We don't have the idea that there is a lack of vitality that we see in our skin when we speak ill of someone. It might have done us a favor to have that, but we don't have that. So what we do is we study the Torah, and through seeing how the rabbis interpret the story, they interpret the story of the tzaras, of this lesion, as being part of a spiritual problem. We are mindful of the spiritual problem that we have to kind of negotiate every single day. And I think as women, negotiate more than men. Not that men are immune from being from gossiping, but we definitely find solace in conversation. We find solace in talking and connection through speech. And so therefore we are more vulnerable, and therefore we have to be we have to be very careful. We have to be more careful. So I saw a beautiful teaching that I would like to share with you. Okay. There's a teaching in the, let me just find the source here. There is a teaching, oh, where's the Mishnah? Okay. So there's a teaching in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about, the Mishnah is the I guess the prelude to the Talmud, right? So the Mishnah goes into the basic laws. The Talmud is the Mishnah and commentaries, essentially. So we have a Mishnah that discusses this notion of tzaras. We have a Mishnah that discusses what is tzaras, how is it found. It goes into greater discussion from our Torah portion into what tzaras is. And there's an interesting law, and that is something that I want to bring to your attention. It's a very fascinating law that the Mishnah brings regarding tzaras, and it's a law that the Rebbe taught about, quoting his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who actually was the chief rabbi of Dnepropetrovsk, which is today called Dnieper in the Ukraine. So timely, and he was a great mystical Kabbalist. And I'm gonna share with you his teaching on this Mishnah. But first, let's get to the Mishnah. Let me find the Mishnah. Here we go. So here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows: Mitzora shenichnas labayis. If a mitzora, so a mitzora is a person with leprosy. Mitzora shenichnas labayis. Kol hakelim sheyesh sham tmeim. All the vessels in it, even up to the roof beams, become unclean, become tameh. Again, unclean and tameh is, like I mentioned, is poor translation, but it's the best we have. Rabbi Shimon says, no, only up to a height of 4 cubits, meaning it doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, but only 4 cubits, which is like the average height of I guess, of a person. But that the vessels become unclean rather immediately. Afilu ad arabas kelim miyat meim. So when a person walks into a house, and a person is a mitzora, a person is someone who has the tzaras lesions, by virtue of the fact that they walk into a house, everything that's in the house becomes immediately contaminated. So of course, now that we're in this very post, or hopefully post, but definitely very COVID sensitive, we know that we're very it's fascinating that everyone was told stay 2 meters, keep your distance. When you're outside, it's different than when you're inside, right? So we have the same notion here that when you're outside, tzaras cannot be transmitted. However, if a person stays under a tree and the tree has very big branches, so yes, if you stay with the tzaras person or right after they were there, yeah, there is a possibility that you become tameh too, because under a tree is a form of like shelter. And the law is that if a person who is a mitzora walks into your house, all your vessels have to be kosher. Now, if the vessel was closed, so an example would be a clay vessel with a very tight fitting lid, that vessel would be not clean on the outside, but the inside would be clean. However, if it was metal, the metal would have to be kosher. If the clay vessel was opened, then the clay vessel cannot be koshered, it has to be destroyed. And it's interesting that the laws of kashrut, when we have china that becomes unkosher, we have no choice. If it's pure china, like a clay vessel, we have to just get rid of it, give it away. If it's stainless steel, we can boil it or kosher it and so forth. So we see a kind of trajectory with those laws as well. But we have an interesting teaching from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, im shaha kidei hadlakas neres. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the house does not become immediately unclean, only if the mitzora stays as much time as needed to kindle the lights. Okay, so it's not if he just pops in for a second, he needs to have enough time to kindle the lights. So then there's a discussion in the commentators. Okay, what does it mean enough time to kindle the light? It takes 2 seconds to kindle a light. So how long is it really? So there's a whole discussion, and the consensus, or at least the majority consensus, is how long it takes to light Shabbat candles, because Shabbat candles involves a blessing as well. So they say a mitzora who walks into a house creates a negative energy or a tuma for the house and actual impurity for the items of the house and the house itself. If that person stays there long enough to light candles, and the rabbis discuss, we're talking probably about Shabbat candles, which takes a little longer. So a few minutes. If he stays for a few minutes, that's a discussion. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the Rebbe, who was a great Kabbalist, he said it's very interesting. Of all the things to choose to give a time frame, why candles? And why the lighting of Shabbat candles? Why does the Mishnah use candles as a parameter, lighting candles as a parameter for creating enough time for something negative to happen? Why Shabbat candles specifically? Because that is what the commentators agree, that we're talking about Shabbat candles, not just like a quick light, but a little bit more of a lighting. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak goes into the notion of what is Shabbat candles and what is created when we light Shabbat candles. And he contrasts Shabbat candles with the Mitzorah. And he says as follows. We're told that, and he cites the Zohar on this. The Zohar says, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah are. Just like a candle brings light, a candle is like who do we consider a mitzvah today? Good question. We don't really have the notion of mitzvah. We left the mitzvah as a spiritual disease, and we do not discuss it from a physical manifestation today. Some people say leprosy, but that is, again, a poor match, but maybe a close relative. But here, the rabbis really wanted to underscore that if we're going to study Vayikra, and we're going to study it in a way that really has no relevance to us, understand that there is a relevance, and that is the idea of gossip. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak asks the question, what's the connection between the lighting of the candles and gossip? And he says, if you look at it, and he quotes the Zohar, it says, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or, that a mitzvah is like a light, and Torah is like a candle, and Torah is like light. So that being in a state of heightened spiritual awareness, consciousness, vibrancy is being connected to a mitzvah, and it's being connected to Torah. And then the reverse or the inverse is true. Engaging in something that is contradictory to Torah and contradictory to mitzvahs has also a spiritual consequence of a lack of vitality as manifest in the Tzarat. So we have this kind of these two opposites, these polar opposites. One is vitality through the fulfillment of mitzvahs, which the Zohar says is Torah is light, a mitzvah is a candle. And then the lack of vitality, as we mentioned, which is a spiritual vacuum that the person who is experiencing Torah is actually experiencing by virtue of the fact that there's something lacking in their inner vitality that has to be rectified. And so Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says it's the fact that the cure, the fact that the cure for, or the antidote for the fact that the antidote, I'm getting messages, I have to shut off my phone. I forget to shut off my phone, and then I apologize for that. The fact that the antidote, yes, when you engage in Lashon Hara, what you're doing is you're actually pulling yourself down. You're pulling yourself down spiritually. Your spiritual conscientiousness and vitality is dimmed. When we gossip, our spiritual conscientiousness and vitality is dimmed. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak quotes the Zohar, and it says, a mitzvah is like a candle, Torah is like light, and that the balance, or the rectification, or the way to balance or rectify this kind of spiritual malaise is by invigorating your spirituality. And so he takes a different approach than just stay away from gossip, because staying away from gossip requires a constant, you're not addressing the root of the problem, which is your spiritual weakness and your lack of spiritual vitality. You're just addressing the behavior. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is saying the behavior is a manifestation of a deeper problem within yourself that you have to work on. And if you can't just say, I won't talk Lashon Hara, but I really feel like it. Oh, I have something so juicy, but I can't tell you. I remember one time I was speaking to somebody, and they said to me many years ago when I was a student, they said, oh, you know, I have such good juicy gossip about this person, but I can't tell you because it's Lashon Hara. And I said, do you realize that the fact that you told me that you have juicy gossip about this person is already a form of Lashon Hara? Like, just keep your mouth zipped. But when you have this desire to say it, you're not dealing with the problem, which is like you still enjoy it. So Rabbi Yitzchak says you have to see gossip as a lack of spiritual vitality within yourself, and not to deal with the fact that I won't say it. Okay, I won't say it. I'll shut my mouth. I'll be good. But deep down, you still have that spiritual malaise because you still want to say it. So he says, what is the anecdote? What is the balance? He says the balance is mitzvah and Torah or. And then he says something very interesting. He quotes the Zohar. The Zohar says, of all the mitzvahs in the world, what rectifies the lack of light in the world? The lack of light, the original munificent light that was part of this universe that got lost in the first sin. What was that light? What recreates that light? What brings the light of redemption to this world? More than anything, the Zohar says the lighting of Shabbat candles. The lighting of Shabbat candles fixes the lack of light in this world because it is a physical manifestation of physical light. And we see that there's this correlation between physicality and spirituality. So that light, and we know we're attracted to light. Yes, someone said about holding revenge, of course, diminished spirituality. So he says that the light of Shabbat, he quotes the Zohar, that the light of Shabbat candles is really the manifestation of a spiritual light. And by creating the physical light, we actually bring the spiritual light. And what we do when we light Shabbat candles is that we are engaged conscientiously in an attempt to bring light into this world. And the Talmud says that we light Shabbat candles to bring shalom bayit, to bring peace into the home. And the reason is because people could trip. And the Mishnah Berurah, I'm just going to share that with you here, if I could just find it. The Mishnah Berurah says, one second. We have the Mishnah Berurah here? No, let me just pull the Mishnah Berurah here. No, not the Mishnah, but the Mishnah Berurah. Where are you? Okay. Let me just share that with you here. Do we have the Mishnah Berurah? Yes, perfect. So here's the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah is an explanation on the Mishnah. And the Mishnah Berurah says as follows: Hadlakas neres chayva mishum shalom bayis. Shabbos candles are an obligation because of shalom bayit, peace in the home. Shelo yichshal be'etzai be'even, so that a person should not trip over a stick or a rock. V'tzarech liyos aneres aruchim sheyidluku ad sheyabayu lebeis b'layla. So the candles need to be long enough in order that they last the night, because without this, the blessing is said in vain. So the Mishnah Berurah says that candles are a part of a shalom bayit. So we know that candles bring peace. And the Rebbe points out that the fact that the eitz and the even, that we light the Shabbos candles in order that we should not trip over a stick or a rock. The Rebbe asks the question, why a stick and a rock? Because a stick and a rock were traditionally what idol worship was made from. Idol worship is anything in your life that is not connected to divinity, that denies divinity. So what happens is when you don't have the candle, we don't have the light, we don't have the passion, when you don't have the excitement and the positive energy in your life, you are vulnerable to the gossip. So long as you have the light, so the light of Torah, the light of mitzvahs, that the Zohar says, the most open manifestation of that light is the light of the Shabbat candles, which brings peace into the home, which brings vitality and spiritual conscientiousness to the home. And the Rebbe says the fact that the Mishnah Berurah points out stone and rock and tree and wood is because those are the elements that we use to create idol worship, idols rather. And so it is a why not anything else, right? Not or trip. Why stone? Why does it say stone and tree? You could have said anything else. It is to underscore that this lack of vitality can take its many forms. The obstacles that we have are the things that we don't when we deny who is really the master of the universe, and it's all connected into this lack of consciousness, this lack of spiritual consciousness. So the remedy for gossip is to be more spiritually conscientious, to do more mitzvahs, and to bring more light of Torah into your world, so that you don't have to fight so much your desire to speak lashon hara, your desire to gossip. You're going to be so filled with positive energy and spiritual vitality that you won't want to gossip. It's not even going to be tasteful to you because you're going to be in a heightened state of spiritual vitality. You're going to be stronger spiritually. And the fact that the Talmud uses the example of the Shabbat candle as the time frame with which it takes to lose that spiritual consciousness underscores, says Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and it's brought down by the teachings of the Rebbe, that how the Shabbat candles actually can be a huge step forward in our own spiritual vitality. And so I found this teaching, I thought it was just absolutely wonderful. Talking about lashon hara, talking about tzaras, and in the middle of all of this comes a teaching about Shabbat candles, and also about, in general, that the pathway to spiritual improvement in the short term is to stop doing that. But that doesn't work in the long term, because as long as we still are enmeshed in this kind of negative energy that makes us want to gossip, that makes us want to speak ill of someone, we are actually lacking in spiritual vitality. So the answer is to change ourselves and to surround ourselves with more spiritual dynamism that is found in Torah mitzvahs. And then de facto, we won't have the same negative energy or lack of spiritual vitality that will drive us to gossip. And therefore, lighting Shabbat candles, says Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, is a great way to begin this process, because you bring light into your home and you bring peace into your home. And we know that when we are at peace with ourselves, we are also at peace with others and at peace with the world. So I thought it was a beautiful teaching, connecting gossip and bringing light. So of course, all light, the light of goodness and the light of kindness and the light of Torah and the light of mitzvahs, but especially the light of the Shabbat candles. So we, and I include myself in this conversation as a woman, that if we see that we have a tendency to gossip, we can take a stock and say, what can I do to bring more spiritual vitality into my life? Because we know that when we speak lashon hara, even though we don't have the manifestation of the skin disease today, we are really doing something that puts us like a mitzora. We are lowering our spiritual conscientiousness. And why would we want to lower our spiritual conscientiousness? So it's a reminder to empower ourselves to fill up with good spiritual energy, positive energy, surround ourselves with Torah and mitzvot, and specifically, especially us women, to light Shabbat candles, and maybe during this time, while we light Shabbat candles, to make a prayer and ask that we should be filled with positive energy, to try to see others in a positive light, to try to see ourselves in a positive light, and to seek blessing and vitality and a connection to Hashem that is really one and one with ourselves, and therefore avoiding what we don't see, which is what we are having. It's what our soul is having. Our soul is having this tzaras. Our soul is having this rash. We don't have this rash anymore, but our soul is nevertheless experiencing this lack of vitality. So we can do our part to be more spiritually in tune and more personally and have a greater vitality, in as much as I think that there's an enjoyment, like I mentioned, to chatting and schmoozing. But if we could be a little bit more spiritually consciousness, we can avoid hurting others by strengthening ourselves, not just by keeping our mouths up and say, I don't want to say this, but really trying to reframe ourselves and to try to keep ourselves fit, spiritually fit, not just physically fit by walking or doing exercise, but spiritually fit by being connected to positivity and Torah and mitzvot, and an understanding that this is God's desire, and this is what he wants from us, and this is the way we elevate ourselves, and this is the way we restore the light of the world that was lost. And hopefully each one of us in our own lives can do this, and it can have a ripple effect in the world that desperately needs light, desperately needs healing, desperately needs peace. And so for those of us who do not yet light Shabbat candles, we can begin lighting this Friday night. And for those who do, to take more time to focus, to take more time to meditate, and to allow us to really absorb the light and what this light is creating in our heart, and what this light is creating in our home and for our families, and to try to tap into that light to raise ourselves up, to be a little bit more spiritually dynamic and spiritually fit. And this will only bring blessing to ourselves and also to blessings to everyone around us. So the cure for gossip is light.
Devorah,
Yes.
it's almost like that state after giving birth, when you talk about someone else, you're taking your consciousness outside of the self, which is where God resides, and you're focusing on something out there, and you have no clue what they've been through. You don't know the context, you don't know the history, you don't know where they've been, and you can be the cause of a huge tragedy for them, and for no reason, just because you were so careless.
Right. So I think that the focus has to be that we want to be connected. We want to be connected on a positive level. We want to be connected to God. And one of the things that the Tanya teaches is that there's this trifecta between, loving God and loving the Jewish people and loving mitzvot, and that we can't separate the three, that they're all interconnected. So that if we want to love God, we have to try to love each other. Now, it's very hard to love people that you're angry at, or you think hurt you, or even if you're just miffed, or you find that their choices are not something that you approve of. Yes, it's a work in progress. We're put down on this earth, not for 5 minutes. We're supposed to work on ourselves. But I found this teaching extremely, forgive the pun, but extremely illuminating. It was a very unusual teaching. Going into the Talmud and seeing that the Talmud uses lighting candles as that parameter for how long a person can create negative energy. And we know that everything that happens in the negative happens in the positive. So if that is the way that time frame is the way a person can create negative energy in a way that really brings a lack of spiritual wholeness to the home, we can also create positive energy for that very time frame. And sometimes it doesn't take a lot to create positive energy. It doesn't take so much. It's just a consciousness. It's an awareness, and that awareness happens to us when we go back to Torah and we go back to mitzvot. And lighting Shabbat candles, because it's such a physical thing and such a light, it as long as the candles are burning, it reminds us of that. And especially that candles are so associated with the notion of shalom bayit, peace in the home, that candles are really connected to peace. And we know, you want to have a nice dinner, a romantic dinner, you light candles. People use candles for ambiance. So even in a very basic way, we understand that light does something to us. And a candle in darkness represents something very beautiful as well. So we need to tap into that. And I found this teaching to be very interesting, very different. I never encountered this teaching before. And I thought, you know what, the world needs light. You open up the news and the world needs light. And if we can do our part in our own hearts, and for those around us. And then, there's these concentric circles, that can get created, and we don't know where that lands. We know one thing, that we do impact each other, especially today. We know that this notion of, we're 6 degrees of separation, I think, is even closer because of social media, because of the instant ability to connect. And so if we could connect in a positive way, imagine the wavelengths that we bring. So it has to start first within ourselves, and then, concentrically going out in our nuclear loved ones, and then by extension work, and so in society. But the fact that the Talmud uses the notion of candles as for Tzaras, and the fact that we know that Maimonides and then after him, all the great commentators say, yes, Tzaras is intrinsically connected with gossip. So we have to take a lesson about gossip when we study Tzaras. And so I hope that's given everyone a little bit of inspiration, and also just a reminder how important Shabbat candles are from a spiritual perspective. The Zohar speaks of it in such great terms. Zohar says that all the mitzvot of the Torah bring light to the world, but nothing brings light to the world like the light of the Shabbat candles. Can you imagine? All the mitzvot and all the Torah bring light to the world, but nothing does it like the Shabbat candles. So Shabbat candles are super important. So,
and they've been given to the women.
And we are the custodians, even though if a woman doesn't light, she can't light. Let's say she's out of town, she's by the doctor, she's in the hospital, or for whatever reason, a woman is unable to light. She couldn't get to her house. Someone can light on her behalf. The house should be lit, and primarily, whoever else lives there. So yes, actually, young boys, who live in a dormitory, there's a question that they may have to light Shabbat candles. Certainly, Shabbat candles have to be lit because Shabbat candles are for peace. And so, yes, the woman is the vehicle with which this peace is brought to the home, which is a very beautiful idea, that we are given this task. But if a woman is not lighting it for whatever reason, she's not able to, she can ask someone else to do it on her behalf, and then her husband actually has the obligation, or whoever else is living in the house has the obligation, because the bottom line is the candles have to be lit. But yes,
Devorah, while you were speaking, it just struck me, when a child is in the womb, it's hidden, but the woman is shining like a candle. And
beautiful.
So lighting the candle given to her to do is almost in a way to make the home into a womb.
Yes, the sages say in the Talmud, in Shabbos, in Tractate Shabbos, they discuss candle lighting, and you see that they say that people who light many candles will merit having children who are Torah scholars, and so on and so forth. So some people have the custom that they light 2 candles, right, for Shabbat, Shamar v'Zachar, but then some people have the custom of adding a candle for all of their children. Some light for all of their children and for all of their grandchildren, but certainly for their children. So and one of the things that the Rebbe instituted was that single girls should light Shabbat candles, and so they should be trained in that mitzvah. So by the time they get married, they're used to doing it. But to light Shabbat candles for your children is something that a person can always add, because we're always allowed to add light. So if a person lights 2 candles, it's okay to start lighting extra candles. And I light Shabbat candles, and I light one for all of my children, and I pray for all my children and for their spouses and for their children when I light Shabbat candles. And it's a special moment in time, because we stop everything and we do this lighting. And I find that it is an auspicious time. It's an auspicious time to pray for anything that's in our minds. It's a great time to meditate. And there's something about the glow of the candles. We cover our eyes, so we disconnect from the world. And so, yeah, even if someone is lighting Shabbat candles, they want to add for their children, they can do so as well. But certainly to light Shabbat candles is a great time for meditation. It's interesting, and just as a side note, that there are the 3 mitzvahs that are associated primarily and exclusively with women, have certainly become associated with women, which is the taking of the challah, and the lighting of the Shabbat candles, and the going into the mikvah, are 3 times where they become very auspicious for private prayer introspection. And therefore, the Rebbe said that it would be a good idea that before lighting Shabbat candles, right before, not after, because after we're not allowed to touch things that are not Shabbat, but right before lighting Shabbat candles, to give a donation to charity or to put some money into charity, so that you anchor your very spiritual light with something physical that actually improves the life of someone else right before you do that. So you're actually anchoring your mitzvah with actually helping someone else physically. So even putting a couple of coins in a tzedakah box to someone else already puts you in a state of other consciousness, God consciousness. And so you're already going into this kind of premeditative state. And then of course, lighting the Shabbat candles and afterwards, and lighting Shabbat candles is beautiful. When I was a kid, there was a tape that I these kids' story tapes. There was a song that always stayed with me. It was about a little boy watching his mother light Shabbat candles, and it goes like this, if I remember it correctly. I used to think my mother was the Shabbos queen. She stood so regally with royal grace and whispered to the king of the universe, Hashem, in a very special place behind her covered face. I know my mother's not asking him for diamonds. My noble mother does not want some gold. She's asking him to help me study all the Torah's ways and to let her eyes behold the joy as she grows old. Oh, when I grow up, no matter what life brings, Hashem will give me the strength I need to handle it, and I will walk by the light of 1,000 Friday nights and the prayers of my mother who always had her candles lit. So this is something that yeah, this is something that I grew up with. It was a kid's tape that we had. It was a boy preparing for Shabbos. I don't remember as a kid, but that song always stayed with me. I said, I don't know if I remember the words, but I always had this idea that my mother was lighting the Shabbat candles and she wasn't asking for gold, but she was asking for something much more important. And so it's something that really is a treasure that we have, and we should, tap into it. And now we find out that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, the Talmud says, that the fact that this is connected to tzaras and gossip means that this is the power that we have to overcome the spiritual imperfections that are part and parcel of the human experience, is to light the Shabbos candles and bring more light into our house and have a higher consciousness, a spiritual consciousness, which will help us overcome all the difficulties, including our own difficulties to being not so kind. So this is a great exercise. So yeah, that's it. So I'll look at all the comments, and I please God, I will send out an email right now. I'm not going to leave my computer and do something else. I will send out an email for the.
But Devorah, Lashon Hara, we do it to ourselves also with negative stuff.
Yes, of course. You know what? I heard something very great from Rabbi Adin Steinfeld years ago when he came to speak. He said, the first person that you have to love and have to have a Havas Yisrael for is yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, and if you're not at peace with yourself, how can you be at peace with anybody else? If we don't feel good about ourselves, we can't see others in a negative light. We do have to, it's an interesting thing that we have to do with ourselves. We have to accept ourselves. Because if we don't accept ourselves, we're in a state of constant tension, and it's not healthy. On the other hand, we can't be complacent about ourselves, because we can't accept everything about ourselves, because we need to fix ourselves. We're a work in progress until 120 years old. The rabbis and the Ava would say, "Al talmid ba'atzmacha ad yom moscha," don't believe in yourself until the day of your death. Meaning, until that time, you have to work on yourself. So we have this double thing that we have to accept ourselves to say, this is the way God made me. If I have a predilection to certain kind of behavior or tendencies, that's my challenge. And not to beat ourselves up, accept it. At the same time, say, I'm still going to work at it. So we have to do both. And yes, and we should not speak Lashon Hara about ourselves, to ourselves in our heads. Oh, stupid, you shouldn't have done that. That is very, very damaging. So yes, let's talk nicely to ourselves and about ourselves too when we speak to ourselves. 100% great point. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful week. I'll look at and I'll try to organize something for Passover. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a blessed week. Take care, everyone.